Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Springboard's first ever data science career track office hour. So this is an office hour where we'll be talking about topics specific to data science career track, and many of our office hours will be interviewing some of our alumni who've gotten jobs in data science to ask about their career path. So today we have one of our star alumni, Ruben Bloom, who took the data science intensive a few months ago and now works as a data scientist at a company in San Francisco called Euclid Analytics. Welcome, Ruben.
Hi, Raj. Yeah, thanks for inviting me back to kind of share what I learned from you and I learned from my experiences going onward.
Yeah, we're really excited to have to hear that. So to start out, tell us a little bit about your journey into data science. How did you end up taking the Springboard course?
How I ended up taking the Springboard course. So I actually took an electrical engineering degree. However, what I kept finding, both in my degree and afterwards, is that everything kept becoming data. Like in my degree, I worked in a lab for a while, and there it was all like these big fly brain recording data sets. So recordings from fly brains, large data sets, kind of like manipulating them, doing machine learning on them. I suppose that was my first taste. And then in my final year, I was doing an honors thesis, and there I was working with like data sets of like people's speech, processing those, again, doing various running algorithms on them. And it kind of seemed wherever I looked, my interests keep hitting up against data and machine learning. And kind of after I graduated, I realized, okay, this is where it's at. Data is like the most important skills. This is what I really need to learn. And so I looked around at my options, and that's kind of what led me to Springboard. First, I saw one of the kind of online pathways, and then I saw, hey, they actually have a whole program that looks pretty good, and I signed up for it.
Well, we're glad you did. So now that you're working as a data scientist in industry, our students always ask us one question: what does a data scientist actually do? And we'd love to hear your perspective on it. Maybe you can tell us about a specific project you worked on at work or about a typical day. Give us something concrete here.
Right. So I'll probably say that what a data scientist does will depend on which data scientist you ask. And I can kind of talk about my experience. So this is like one possibility. And very much the answer is I do science with data. And I'll explain what I mean. I mean, like if you imagine like your conventional science, you kind of have a hypothesis, you have something you're investigating. Maybe you're investigating how, minerals form or how bees pollinate flowers. So in my case, what Euclid does is we kind of, we collect information about shopper behavior from their smartphones. So kind of we're studying shoppers in kind of stores and malls, but by way of their smartphones. But this means we have to understand how smartphones behave, and it's actually quite a complicated phenomena. Like when do they send signals, when they don't, how they interact with Wi-Fi, how they go to sleep, battery level. All these factors kind of affect how the smartphones behave, and there's like this whole big science to figure out what's going on, what can we predict. And this matters because how the phones behave affects like kind of what we can detect and interpret from the data. So the meaning of the data comes from the behavior of devices. And that's kind of where I come in, where I'm really trying to understand what's going on. So on the one hand, I'm working with like very large data sets, millions of phones, billions of visits, where we're kind of analyzing that using large big data infrastructure, working with Scala and Spark, other big data technologies. And on the other end of it, I'm working with in the lab, kind of we have test phones and I'm running experiments on them, kind of figure out, if I do this with the phones and I do that with the phones, does this line up with what I'm seeing in the large scale data set? Steadily building together a picture of what's going on. And then sometimes you'll find out, okay, so we've got this kind of discrepancy. Can I, build a statistical model? Can I predict it? Can I correct it? And that's very much like my day to day.
Wonderful. I had no idea, but now that you mention it, that makes sense. There's so much complexity in smartphone behavior. And you're almost like you're a detective kind of trying to reverse engineer what's going on.
I always thought science was for like things that nature made. I didn't think the science was for things which were man-made, but it totally is.
Right.
Because you,
Well, you're working on fly brains at some point, and now you're working on smartphone brains or something like that. All right.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about the job search process, since that's something our students are keenly interested in. So you took the data science intensive, and obviously you did all the technical stuff in that, all of the
Mhm.
machine learning and all that. And then you went about finding your first job in data science. So how did you do that? How did you find interesting companies? How did you get interviews in those companies?
Mhm. So I think the absolute first step is to kind of really figure out what it is that you want. Or if you don't know what you want, to figure out what the right questions are, what the options are. Like figure out what are the different kinds of companies out there. And they do vary. There is a difference between a small startup with 5 people, a big startup with 200 people, and a multinational company with thousands of employees all over the place. They all kind of behave differently, that your jobs are different, how you interact with people is different. So the first thing I did was to kind of figure out what did I want, what kind of opportunities were going to be right for me with what I was after in terms of like size and style. And that kind of like first guided my question of thinking about which companies would be suited. In my case, what mattered to me most was kind of who I'd be working with.
Hmm.
So I became either very interested in like companies with like a really good reputation for having the best teams, or otherwise finding companies where I could just tell the people are very impressive. Their LinkedIn profiles showing that they've done,
Hmm.
impressive things, or you talk to them, or you look and you see that they're doing good work. So there's kind of drawing up like I guess a list of companies. You've kind of got big companies, where everyone knows their name, like Google, LinkedIn, Airbnb. They're big companies. They have money. They like hire like really great people. So they were some of my options. But then I was kind of looking around. You've got like AngelList, Crunchbase, and then kind of going to meetups, like the meetup scene. Like if you're in the Bay Area or any other kind of like tech hubs, probably true of like New York and maybe Seattle. You can kind of see what meetups, and often companies which are interested in hiring will host meetups to kind of get their name out there, give you a chance to meet them. And I had at least several interviews I got into through meetups, either the meetups themselves or the kind of speaker at the meetup was someone who was like trying to like get out there.
Hmm.
And often, I could meet the CEO or the CTO or chief data scientist of a company who just gave a speech and you talk to them. And that was one way to like kind of, I'd email them and they'd forward my email onto the recruiter. And that was like a good way to get meetups. And of course, the other big one is references.
Yeah.
Kind of your network, you're knowing people. If you don't know people, back to meetups. Meetups is a great way to
Get to
meet
know
people. Yeah. So I guess meetups, AngelList, Crunchlist, kind of big companies, depending on your background and your credentials, you'll find it easier or less easy to kind of get big companies and kind of your first preferences or your second preferences.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of options, and perhaps the most important thing is to keep looking and like find a large number.
Yeah. So this is something that a lot of our students struggle with. It's like, I know the Google and the Facebooks and the Ubers and the big ones, but how do I go about finding these other companies that no one has heard of? Did you do anything specific to find those besides, AngelList and Crunchbase and meetups and stuff?
Besides all that, I did go to one conference. That was actually another way. There are like there are generally conferences around where companies who want to be seen will go to. So that's probably another option.
Cool. Awesome. So then once you knew about these companies and, you'd built some of these connections and had those initial conversations, what did you do to actually land interviews, especially go past, the initial stages of those interviews?
So in this case, I think that the actual answer is that references. Definitely at the early stage, I feel like references is like what reliably got me interviews. And I think this might be because that I didn't sell myself quite well enough on paper.
What does that mean?
Like with my resume or like with applications. I think it's like more difficult to make yourself stand out and seem like a worthy candidate with just a piece of paper someone glances at.
Yeah.
Then if someone recommends you, it's like, oh yeah, well they're trusting the person who did the recommendation.
Yep.
To have done the thing.
I agree. And that is exactly the advice we give in our career track. Like, don't rely on resumes and so on, because it's not you. I mean, your resume may be stellar, but people have like 10 seconds to look at a resume, especially companies like Google or big companies which get thousands of resumes a day. So,
I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't get through a resume, but it does take work. Like maybe I'd put it like this: I'd say that when it comes to interviews, there are two skills, and like and there's the skill of getting interviews, and there's the skill of passing interviews. They're different and not necessarily that related skills. Like you can be fantastic at passing interviews, but not know how to like get yourself into them.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, those are very orthogonal things. Very well said. So now that you mentioned that, like the two different skills, we talked a little bit about getting interviews. So let's talk a little bit about passing interviews. So in your experience, you did I'm sure quite a few different interviews. Did most of the interviews follow like the same steps or process, or did you see a lot of variation?
No, they really did follow the same process. Like there's kind of almost a template where it goes, you'll have a first phone screen with the recruiter. That'll only be a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. They'll want to hear your general background. Like deep questions, just like, who are you? What's your background? What are you interested in? They might want to know questions about, when you're able to start or where you're coming from. Yeah. Just very loose. So long as you didn't upset them, which shouldn't be too hard to do, you'll then have like your first tech phone call where they'll email you, you'll schedule a time, and then they'll call you and you'll get like some tech questions over the phone. Yeah. And what I actually found is that then always like there'd usually be a second phone interview after the first one, sometimes with like a slightly more senior person or slightly more serious. And usually either like before or after the second call, you might also have a take-home exercise of some kind, and they're not going to be too big because they expect that people might be getting a lot of these. They might expect that the better candidate you are, the busier you are. Yeah. So like if the company is good, it'll be short, but it'll like really allow you to show how good you are. Yeah. But I suppose with these, something I think I underappreciated is you need to have a good story to tell. Yep. Like over the phone. Like in general, you need to have a good story of who you are, why you're into data, and it almost needs to be like I don't want to say like a fairy tale, but it's got to have like good structure so it's clear.
It's a story.
It's a story. Yeah. There's a beginning, a middle, and the end is like here you are there to be a great data hero on their team. Yeah, I always tell my students that they need to have a really good and sharp 60-second pitch, which answers the question, why are they interested in this role and why are they interested in this company? And that's something really important. One thing we heard a lot from when we were doing the career pilot was that people often actually messed up the recruiter stage, the very first phone call, because they didn't have a good story. And they couldn't convince the recruiter that they were actually legitimate candidates. So very surprising. Okay, so you have your phone interviews and your take home. What happens after that? What happens after? Well, you get to an on-site where you're brought on, and depending on the company, but usually they'll just be like you'll be scheduled, half an hour with this person, that person, from throughout the company, where they'll have you each person will want to get to know you. Again, have your story ready because each person is going to want to hear your story. And then they'll, as you'd expect, they ask you various technical questions related to their area. They give you a chance to ask them questions to learn about that, about the, demonstrate that you're interested and learn. Yeah. This is, it's important. Like a lot of people get into companies and then turn out things are different from what they thought from the outside. Yeah. What can I say there in terms of any more specific questions about the on-site? So tell me a little bit more about so you said people ask you about these various technical questions related to the area. What are some of the areas that people ask questions in? What are some of the areas? So this can depend different on the job. Like some jobs here start to look a lot more like software engineering interviews where you kind of be expected to kind of look at do a algorithms problem on the whiteboard, and that's very much like handled in books like Cracking the Coding Interview. On the other hand, if you're like going in a good data science company, you might get an interesting analysis question. Like, I had someone draw various data points on the board and like talk to me about kind of how would I look at these few data points and what would I do if I wanted to know if there was a statistical anomaly in these. Kind of like testing my thinking on the fly. And this was kind of like something I'd never seen in an analysis textbook, but it really showed kind of like the depth of the analysis that this company wanted to get at. Yeah. And really made me think. Probability questions can be popular for like data science. Just basic, you have a fair coin and you want to like produce a bias coin. What do you do with a fair coin?
Right.
Things like that you can like get in various books. Back to the story, I want to keep emphasizing this. Be able to talk about your projects, kind of convey your projects in a clear and easy to understand and also like impressive way.
Yeah.
The challenges you overcome, why it was difficult, why you were like clever to overcome that, maybe how it like kind of ties back to the same kind of work you're doing here.
Cool. So obviously, it sounds like the stuff that you learned, the technical material you learned during a Springboard course was quite useful, but there was more that you had to do beyond that. So beyond the technical material in your Springboard course, what are some resources that benefited you the most in your interview prep process?
So I suppose the largest gap that needed to be met, that wasn't in the Springboard, at least when I did it, was kind of the algorithms and like data structures technical side, just because that so often gets lumped in with kind of data science interviews. There's certainly like great resources on that, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But kind of just knowing that's like a very common thing to get asked, and it does matter. Like if you're working with very large data sets and you're writing, a function, you want to be able to know, is this linear time? Is this like super linear time? How long will it take to run? So that's like a pretty reasonable question to ask, and like something good. I mean, a single like algorithms and data structures class is really enough to know that kind of stuff. Yeah,
basically like order and that kind of notation and all of that.
Right.
And basic like lists and dictionaries and basically hash tables, basically.
Exactly.
Cool. So that was the biggest gap that you needed to fill. All right.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right. So let's go to some of the some general advice for students. What are some things that you wish you had known before you started looking for a data science job?
That I wish I'd known before I started looking. I suppose that it's a slow process. That kind of, you might be eager to get a job, but you might be spending all your time on this. But companies kind of, they range from like even a fast company, the fastest you'll ever get an offer is a month. Yeah. Big companies like Google will take like 3 or 4 months, and you kind of got to split in there. So if you kind of want a job, in 2 months' time, you really need to like fill up your funnel now and expect that this will take a while. Yeah. That this is, because like each stage like takes a while. Like between the recruiter call, your first tech call, your second tech call, on-site, often a second on-site, offer acceptance. This takes a while. Yeah. So kind of know that this is, prepare yourself mentally. We're kind of working on job hunting for some time.
That's very good advice. There are a couple of audience members. There's Sarmad and there's Matt. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. We have a few minutes more.
Hi, this is Matt. I had just a question about your capstone selection and how it, affected your performance in interviews. Was it easy to speak to that? And when you chose your capstone project, did you choose it knowing that you wanted to target certain companies in your job search?
Yes. So it was very targeted. The capstone project I chose was a competition on Kaggle put out by Airbnb. Actually, specifically a recruiting challenge, whereby if you did well in their challenge, they would give you an interview. It was fortunately disappointing because when it came to the end of it, they said that they weren't actually interested in hiring for people without prior data science career experience, which I thought was a bit misleading. That being said, it was a good project. I chose it because it was technically challenging. And I suppose in that case, it was impressive to people who kind of understood the tech, like later on. If I was talking to a data scientist who understood why these were challenging machine learning problems, that was a good project. But it wasn't necessarily understandable to a recruiter at the early stages who couldn't really appreciate why this was a challenging problem. In general, I'm guessing, let's see, for the capstone project, I guess decide what you're looking to get out of it, whether you're looking to really build your technical expertise or building something to show, depending on which you really need. Either could be good, or you could end up doing two projects, maybe one with Springboard, maybe one outside of Springboard, kind of your fancy show project with a website which looks cool, and a different project where you're pushing the limits of technical challenges.
So Ruben, actually in the career track, we actually have two capstone projects. So students have to do two of them because it's a longer program. So that's great that you mentioned that. But yeah, that's a great way to think about the two projects. One is to develop your technical expertise, and the other one is to do the showing and telling. That's a fantastic way. Any more questions, Matt and Sarmad, before we conclude?
I had one more. This is Matt again. What percentage of the interviews would you say did you gather from the interview that the employer was looking for a more specialized skill versus kind of an all-around skill set? Do you think you know that going into the interview process, or even before when you're applying, or were you ever caught off guard by any particular questions that might have seemed more specialized? Just curious on your thoughts there.
So I think not at the entry level, which is where I was coming in. I think specialization really takes place after you've been in a job for a few years. Kind of at the entry level companies, they're looking for general showing that you're a competent person. You know things, you're able to learn, you're able to work as part of a team. It might be a bonus point, if they work with, Hadoop, and you have a bit of Hadoop experience. But I think generally that's kind of outweighed by just being your projects and your grades and other things demonstrating that you're a capable worker will matter much more than specialization kind of coming out of a boot camp.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Sarmad, I just talked to you, and you mentioned that you were looking to transition from a hardware engineering / electrical engineering career to data science. Is there anything that Ruben might be able to help you with, since he has made a similar transition? Feel free to ask.
Yes. I would like to know whether employers are concerned about the transition, or do they take it as something normal or expected?
I think it's normal and expected. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of background. Just looking at most data science job postings, they'll often list and they'll say math, statistics, computer science, or other related technical background. They'll generally be quite flexible. That you have a technical background, you're good with numbers, you understand these things. They'll expect that your projects or your interview will demonstrate you know what you're talking about, and they're not going to be prejudiced because you did electrical engineering instead of computer science or statistics.
Great, that's good to know.
Cool. All right, we're close to concluding. Ruben, do you have any final words of wisdom to encourage and motivate our students?
So when it comes to job hunting is tough. You're constantly putting yourself out there to be evaluated. Are you good enough to be hired? And I think it's really important to remember that you are valuable. There's a lot of data out there. There's so much stuff you can do with data. And as somebody who knows how to work with data and like can provide value with data, you do have a lot to offer. It's just a matter of like finding someone who really sees that. But you should like never doubt it yourself, that you were like peddling some of the world's most valuable skills here. And it's just a matter of time.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much, Ruben, for your time and for your excellent story and advice. So, and good luck with everything in your what I hope will be a fantastic career in data science.
Thanks so much, Raj. All the best.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great evening.
Yeah. Goodbye. Have a great evening.